Last night, I received a video clip from my wife's cousin in India via WhatsApp. In it, the mastermind behind CryptoViewing.com, Dick Algier, claims that Congress planned their response to the coronavirus almost a year before the onset of the crisis. Algier clearly believes that this story is important.
My head is spinning with this one. I'm going to take you down the rabbit hole. Is this the most important report I've ever done in 34 years of being a journalist? Might be.
Algier attempts to prove that Congress knew that future funding was necessary and was moving in that direction as early as January of 2019.
Aid Relief and Economic Security Act get introduced. It was because of the effect of the pandemic, right? Well, let's scroll down on the actual congressional website and see that this bill, H.R. 748, was introduced in the House on January 24th, 2019. They were working on this bill May and July 2019. It was called the Coronavirus Aid Bill. What the excuse my language.
He's wrong. It's all that procedural stuff that he skipped over in the clip that undermines his tidy conspiracy theory. Like every conspiracy theory, this is a volatile combination of the conspiratorial mindset of the author and his lack of understanding of the legislative process. 3 generations of Americans were raised on the simplistic explanation of the legislative process offered by Schoolhouse Rock's "I'm Just a Bill." The problem is that the rarefied description is woefully incomplete, leaving watchers mostly ignorant about how a bill becomes a law. Legislative process is complicated. It's even more complicated in complicated times. Anyone who fails to understand it is in very good company. Many members of Congress failed to grasp the intricacies of the process. However, ignorance does not grant a license for spreading false information. Looking at the legislative history of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, CARES, it is possible to arrive at an explanation that does not rely on a government-wide, even global conspiracy. I don't have any inside information. I don't work in Congress. However, using my understanding of the legislative process as a student of Congress, I think I could get pretty close on this one. By the time that the CARES Act was considered in the Senate, members of the House of Representatives were already back in their districts, in their homes, with their families, just like the rest of us. Considering new legislation would require members to return to the Capitol, raising the specter of the virus spreading among House members. What was Congress to do? With House members in quarantine, they could not push forward a new bill. The Senate needed a vehicle for passing the CARES Act. It would need to find a bill that could be amended and passed with the House on recess. H.R. 748 did not begin life as the CARES Act. It was originally introduced and entitled the Middle Class Health Benefits Tax Repeal Act of 2019. It was a measure intended to roll back taxes on so-called Cadillac healthcare plans. It was imposed as part of the Obamacare legislation. In mid-2019, H.R. 748 received overwhelming support, passing with 419 members voting yes and 6 voting against. By the time the coronavirus epidemic hit the United States, H.R. 748 was already in the Senate waiting for action. In need of a legislative vehicle, the Senate chose to amend H.R. 748 with the language that would become the CARES Act. But if you listen to Algier, it sounds pretty odd.
Here is Connecticut Representative Joe Courtney, one of the most prescient human beings, not only in Congress, but in history. He named his bill the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act in January 2019, 11 months before the disease emerged.
We already know that 748 was not the CARES bill originally. So why did they choose H.R. 748 as the vehicle? First, it had already passed the House with a large margin. With the consent of the House, it could be amended and sent to the President without reconsideration in the House. Second, it was a bill that had been considered by the House Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction or responsibility over many of the provisions in the Act. That fact made amendments to the legislation germane to the House bill, removing an impediment to the House reconsidering the legislation. This was a practical solution to an unprecedented and seemingly impossible situation. In the sciences, we operate with a simple rule. The simplest explanation is usually best. If you accept the explanation that I've offered, it doesn't require you to make huge logical leaps. One does not have to assume that members of Congress and the President knew in early 2019 that the pandemic was on its way and told no one. Not a single member of Congress or the President let the secret slip. One does not have to assume that, rather than plan to defeat the virus, which would be relatively cheap, Congress and the President decided that adding $3+ trillion in government spending was preferable. As citizens in a democratic republic, we have the obligation to understand how our government works. And we need to employ our critical faculties when we encounter claims that require the suspension of logic, especially when they are prefaced by, "I'm going to take you down the rabbit hole."